The DNA backlog has been reduced by 99.3%. That's according to Police Minister Bheki Cele. He made the comments when he released the crime stats yesterday. Cele says the backlog, which was initially over 241,000, is now at 1,600. Let's get some reaction to this from Phelisa Nkomo, who's the Commission for Gender Equality CEO. Thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate it. I think it's some great news. We do know that this DNA backlog has been a huge challenge with immense pressure on the Police Minister to try and deal with this. I'm sure you welcome the news.
No, yes, absolutely. We think that the clearance of the DNA backlog is just one stream in as far as access to justice. But I mean, that's really not sufficient. I mean, if you look at the numbers of sexual, assault and rape within the quota that the minister was reporting to, have actually increased. In fact, if you look at the data, what is classified according to the police, that contact crime has actually increased by 11.6%. That's a lot in 3 months. So it means that when we are actually, gaining ground on certain aspects in terms of dealing with gender-based violence and reducing crime, but on the other aspects, we're actually not. I think the second issue that really South Africans need to really, really be shocked, but also, kind of like come up with, and in fact work with the SAPS in relation to dealing with crime, is the fact that, we have 52,000, citizens who got arrested, exactly within the same period, and let alone that we had about 7,500 people who've actually died. So in essence, it means that really we're in a country that is actually in turmoil. And I do think that not only the minister needs now to take responsibility, but in fact, I think South African citizens must really not ask the difficult question, but also even, kind of like press for more intersectional approach, which in fact, for a long time, a lot of, community-based organizations, civil society organizations, and even feminists have actually been calling for. That if you want to really deal with crime, the first issue that you really need to deal with around, and that's why I'm talking about the intersectional approach, you need to strengthen, the community policing forums, but as well as with the resources, right? In fact, had the minister himself not at some point introduced militarization of the SAPS, we would have been actually quite far as this country. He actually used his portfolio when he was a commissioner. At some point, he militarized SAPS, which is meant to be a service, but he militarized them. And natural, what that meant is that there was then a disconnect between the police service and the communities. And amongst those as well, he reduced the budget of the SAPS, of the community police forums. Actually, I'm calling it reduce, I'm back probably being polite, but there was no funding for community policing forum because he thought that his militarization agenda will actually succeed in dealing with crime. And instead, the response was that, criminals have become even much more violent in South Africa. If you look at the data of people who were killed through gun and even knives, so it means that everyone else in South Africa is walking around actually being ready or alert that they might be killed anytime and they might be killed anytime and they need to be able to fight back. So
yeah,
I think the statistics for me, we must really, really be concerned about. I think that's a genesis of my comments, that we must be concerned about the numbers that we're seeing.
Yes, sorry to interject there, but I just want to go back to the issue of the DNA backlog, and we'll move into how violent crimes are actually getting. I want us to speak about what you think the police minister needs to do more. So yes, while the backlog has been dealt with and there's been a significant improvement, we must also remember that when there is a DNA backlog, you have victims and you have families who have lost loved ones that have to wait sometimes months, even years, because of this DNA backlog, and their cases cannot proceed. So we need to also remember the delicacy and the sensitivity around the DNA backlog and what this actually does to families. What more do you think the police minister needs to do? Should we have more labs? Should he deploy more resources? What exactly needs to be done?
I think there are several things. I mean, that's true, is that actually, by the way, we must give credit to the Gender-Based Violence Fund, Response Fund, who actually intervened 18 months ago over the issue of DNA labs, because this backlog was actually sitting at about 241,000. And they reach out to the SAPS minister and say, we are actually offering private sector labs. So already the question you're asking is, what needs to be done? So it's clear that dealing specifically with gender-based violence in particular is that we need a public-private partnership. So when the private libraries came into party and say, we will provide our own resources and technical support at no cost to the state, and in essence, it meant that they are actually putting indirectly pressure to the SAPs to make it sure that they also fix their own technical equipment to be able to test. So that's the first thing. I agree with you around, I mean, that we need to have more labs, particularly in communities that we call them hotspots, right? So that you don't have survivors having to wait and interact and see their perpetrators on a daily basis, and sometimes even get threatened, because the delay in the DNA backlog, by the way, is actually, by the way, a second victimization. And we've not really thought about it. And sometimes when we talk about a second victimization, we think about police station. But the fact that the DNA gets delayed is actually justice denied. And therefore, you are then subjected into second victimization because the perpetrator walks scot-free and there's no evidence yet to actually apprehend the perpetrator.
Yeah.
So it's actually trauma to survivors. It's trauma to families. And actually, it's actually not good. It works against, by the way, the whole idea of ensuring that we eradicate gender-based violence in society.
It's definitely secondary trauma. I can speak from experience. It's not the greatest thing to have to sit and wait for DNA results. But I just want to move over to one last question around the recent crime statistics. So, yes, there was some good news with the DNA backlog being dealt with. But if we actually look at the amount of people that are being murdered and how many have been murdered because of gender-based violence, it seems as though crimes are getting more and more violent, and the picture just does not seem as though it's getting any better. I'm sure you, as the Commission for Gender Equality, are rather concerned about this.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there are several things, for instance, that we've raised as a commission, and I suppose even, the feminist movement and gender justice organization, is that you need to take an intersectional approach in dealing with crime, including as well gender-based violence. And that's why there's this national strategic plan on gender-based violence, which amongst those articulate the issue around, leadership, healing, access to justice, and economic power. But you need to add several others. Firstly, you need to really revive community policing forum and resource them. And part of that resourcing really needs, as well as, social mobilization of communities. That's the first thing. I think the second issue, socio-economic issues are very important. In fact, research does show that when you have a rise or increased social inequality, citizens tend to turn against each other. In fact, we do see a lot of that in working class communities. They are actually imploding. You have communities where people have to pay protection fee for them to survive or even run effective businesses. And these are the businesses we need for communities to ensure that the circulation of income, but also people has access to income. That's the second. I think the third issue, which it's coming out, by the way, in the speech of the minister, that we actually need to activate local governance. And that's something, by the way, that, he's kind of like not paid a lot of attention to. So part of it is that the local governance is not only local government as an institution, but he's actually inviting the local government and community-based organizations. And this is something that he's not paid attention to. In fact, I was pleased when I saw that in his speech. And I think that call needs to be resourced, but also there needs to be a much more deeper investment in economic opportunities in communities. Because when you have 66% of young people basking in the sun, being economically disengaged, and 42% of Black women who are also economically disengaged, you're likely to experience this type of turmoil. So in essence, people don't have confidence in the system because they believe that they don't have a stake. So it's important that we use economic development or industrial development to activate and deal with issues of crime within communities.
Okay, thank you so much for your insights, and we do hope that there is some kind of intervention, because having almost 7,000 people murdered in just 3 months is very concerning. Thank you for your time. That is Phelisa Nkomo, who's the Commission for Gender Equality CEO.